Quad 66. Doing a little video here looking at amps drawn, and the reason I did this video was I was a little bit curious to see, since the B-Brain brushless boards have current sensors, whether I could pick up a notable difference between the 1103 motors, the 12,600 kV 1103 Hyperlights, versus the 1202.5s, which are 11,500 kV by RCN power / FPV cycle. So what I did here, the setup is I flew two batteries and I did a crossover design with this. So not super scientific, but at least trying to get a little bit of, kind of validity to it. So what I did is I first flew, so what you're seeing here is the 1103, and you can see I put on the OSD, I labeled 1103 so you can see it easier. And I did a little bit of hover and then a couple of punch outs. And I was sort of watching those amps, but we can also see the max amps at the end. And so coming in here, what you can see is on this first couple of punch outs off this pack, we hit 28 amps. And if you look at some of the punch outs, it was pretty consistent. And so now I took the same pack now, and here I threw it on the 1202.5 build. And so this is kind of like the second half of the pack. Clearly I didn't totally discharge it, but this is after the first one. And we did some punch outs again. And in this case, we're hitting about 27 amps, and this is on the 1202.5 build. When I kind of look at them, I think although we're hitting a similar amps, it's not quite as consistently high as on the 1103s, but it's still up there. And a couple of hovers. It's hard to get much of a difference between the hover because it kind of bounces around a little bit. But I didn't pick up a notable difference between the two. So let's see, I think a couple more punch outs here, and then should be coming in for a landing hopefully, so this doesn't get long and boring. Yep, coming in for landing. And here we go at the end. 27 amps was our peak. And so now what I did is I took the 1202.5 again and stuck the second battery on, and here, and do a little hover and punching out again. And what you should see is that the amps are a little bit higher. I think on here we hit 29 amps on these punch outs. And note that these are old 450s, and this is through a PH2 connector. So I think if you went with new batteries, and especially if you're dumping it through an XT30 connector, I wouldn't be too surprised if you could get it over 30 amps potentially. So a couple more punch outs here on the 1202.5s. And then we'll come in for a landing and be able to confirm that I think the max was 29 amps. And then I take this battery now and fly the second half of it in the 1103. And so that's how we get the crossover. So first I went 1103, then 1202.5. Then I went 1202.5 and then back to 1103. Come on, just land the thing. Here we go. So we land it, yep, and there's the 29 amps. So now I'm taking that same battery and now throwing it in the 1103 and kind of go out, start with a little bit of a hover, and then we're going to push, hit some punch outs here. And what you'll see is on one of these punch outs actually hit 30 amps, even though this is in the second half of the pack. And this is on the 1103s. And so I was trying to do this just to see, is there some obvious reason that the 1103s seem to be harder on the motors after a flight? And just from this, the answer might be kind of no-ish. And maybe it's more of a function that with the real snappy motors, it just lends itself to a more aggressive flying style than the 1202.5s. But one of the reasons to put this video out now, though, is seeing the numbers I'm hitting on this. And this is pretty safe on this board. This is the B-Brain brushless board. It's got the 12 amp ESCs, but a lot of people are doing this on the dedicated 1S boards, whether it's the Happy model or the Beta FPV or the Hummingbird board. And so those boards with their little 5 amp ESCs, 6 amp burst, that's rated for a maximum of 24. So there you go, 30 amps. But so it seems like this would be a good idea to actually go ahead and put this up as a PSA of like, hey, if you're using these motors at 1202.5s with the 3018s, maybe it's a good idea to either run a little bit of a throttle limit, or maybe these boards, if we're kind of like chalking it up to poor reliability and poor quality. Maybe the issue is you're just putting more amps through the board ESC, through the ESCs, than really they're designed for. So pretty straightforward on this one. One thing I did is, and it's not on here, but I did do on the, I put the 3015s, the HQ 3015s, T3 by 15 on the 1202.5s. It's kind of pain, had to drill them out. And I don't think I saw the same high amps on the full punch outs. I need to double check that, but I think those props may be a little bit more efficient, and the big numbers we see on the 1103s is more due to the motor rather than the prop. And that may be the other clue of where that difference is coming in, is that with a lower pitch prop and presumably generating less thrust, but at the same amps, maybe that's where that efficiency loss is coming, where you need to use a little bit more throttle to generate the same thrust, and that's what's happening. Anyways, maybe this saves a couple people from frying their boards, or maybe these newbie drone ESC are the current sensor on the ESC. Is it on the ESC? It's not on the ESC. The current sensor on the board, maybe it's not super accurate, and this should be like cross-validated somehow, but maybe it's helpful. Okay, till next time, cheers.